Thank you very, very much. Good morning, and welcome to An Iowan in Vladivostok, Sergeant John Robinson and the Siberian Intervention. Um, Thank you for that introduction there, Hope. I'm going to talk to you today about a subject that is one of my favorites. So a couple of years ago, I get a phone call from a gentleman in Mount Auburn who wanted to donate his grandfather's personal belongings and papers from the First World War. And it sounded like a promising opportunity, so I made the drive down there to have a look. There was a trunk full of stuff, a uniform, a heavy woolen coat, odds and ends, bits of kit, but a dozen photographs and a stack of documents. This guy grins at me because he knows he's got something I've never seen before, right? He hands me this document right here. That's not bizarre. It's one of his grandfather's promotion certificates, but there it is, right at the bottom there. Given under my hand at Vladivostok, Siberia, the 7th day of September in the year of our Lord, 1919. I do hope that you guys can see this. It's not too blurry. Well, we'll read things aloud like that if you need to be reading. Okay, now I'd heard of the Army's expedition to Russia, America's little-known contribution to the Russian Civil War. But it occurred to me then that I'd never actually seen a real document from the expedition, so clearly drawn up and signed in country. And below, this big stack of documents. This isn't even all of it. Everything he saved from his time in the American Expeditionary Force, Siberia, or AEFS. And I thought, here we go. I need to state right up front that I am a museum registrar. My job is the acquisition and preservation and organization of my museum's collection. I'm not writing a book about this. This isn't a paper presentation. I just want to share this man's story with you, as well as I can piece it together using the available documentation. He didn't keep a diary, so this is going to be pretty bare bones, but we only have 30 minutes anyhow, so let's do it. Now, John Wallace Robinson was born in 1895 in Mexico, Missouri. The family soon after moved to Osage, Iowa, and that's where he grew up. At some point, he developed some reasonable prowess as a mechanic. He was apparently very good. 4 months after America's entry into World War I, he enlisted, June 28th, 1917. And like most enlisted men of his era, he likely was very anxious to carry on the fight to Kaiserville and march on into Berlin, right? Instead, he finds himself here, Camp William McKinley in Manila. Now, the Philippines were important American possession. That can't have consoled Robinson that much. He did well, though, made sergeant in a year. He was put in D Company, 53rd Telegraph Battalion, Signal Corps. He worked as a mechanic and eventually became chief mechanic in charge of all the company's motor vehicles. I'm not really sure when, probably around the time when he made sergeant. I don't really know what he got up to in Manila. I know he found some papayas in this tree here. It's got a little inked X next to the papayas. On the back of the photo, he describes their taste, reassures the reader, probably his mom. His leg is not broken. No, he's merely standing on a riverbank. And then boom, he's here. How in the world? I think it is not well known to most Americans that we committed 15,000 troops to the Russian Civil War. I am going to do my best to, as quickly as I can, I'm watching my time here, explain why. Real quick, I got most of my information regarding very specifically the American involvement from this book, Wolfhounds and Polar Bears, the American Expeditionary Force in Siberia, 1918 to 1920, by Colonel John House, University of Alabama Press, 2016. It's really good. It's got everything. It's very dense. Okay. Now, I'm going to try and explain the Russian Civil War as quickly as possible. Understand, this is an intensely complicated subject, and I'm giving you the information that I think you need to understand what's coming next. Suffice it to say, in 1917 and 1918, a series of revolutions brought down the Tsar's government. It was replaced by a provisional government under a lawyer named Alexander Kerensky. Kerensky's provisional government declared the Russian Republic, a democratic government that lasted weeks. In turn, it was taken down by Lenin and the Bolsheviks in yet another revolution. The country collapsed into a massive, horrifying civil war that lasted until about 1923. Quite literally, dozens of independent factions vied for everything from national governments on down to things like women and plunder. The Russian Civil War was a waking nightmare that left nearly 3 million people dead. Oh, and remember this fact going forward, okay? The Kerensky government wanted to end the war. The Kerensky government wanted to continue the war with Germany. Lenin's government did not, and actually concluded Russia's participation in the war at the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918. The rise of Bolshevism absolutely floored the European allies, as well as Japan, actually. We forget now, but before World War II, Japan was the great anti-Bolshevik bulwark in the East. The revolution was unacceptable. This is the worst case scenario played out in real life. The Allies then embark upon an aggressive campaign to, as Churchill put it, strangle Bolshevism in its cradle. Now, this is early 1918, so you can't attack Russia from the west because Germany's still there, right? The war's still on. So the Allies make several landings around Russia's periphery to try and pinch the Bolsheviks. Now, that's the British, Greeks, French, and others. They make some landings here in the Crimea on the Black Sea, push up the Caucasus here. The Turks actually, the Turks even get on in this. Eventually, they need a little time to lose the war first. There are other landings too, but the only other ones we need to worry about are these two, right here, Archangel, and here, Vladivostok. We'll get to them. So what's the end game here? What's the point? No one really knows. Nothing we'll talk about today is well planned. This is a panicked reaction to the Russian collapse. There's even some vague talk of driving on Moscow from like 6 different directions, a small, unrealistic hope of reinstalling the Kerensky government and reopening the Eastern Front to prevent the Germans from transferring divisions to the Western Front, just stopping the Bolsheviks in general, at the very least, and this is the most important point for us to understand, preventing thousands of tons of war supplies and material intended for the Tsar originally from falling into Bolshevik hands. These supplies are stacked up in the ports. The European allies start putting immense pressure on President Wilson to bring the US in. Now, he's not excited about it. Neither is the rest of America. Heck, half the country was on the fence about World War I to begin with. This business in Russia is madness. Most Americans can't see any benefit to the US stepping into this mess. However, Wilson, for specifically Wilsonian reasons, wants to be the peacemaker at the end of World War I. To do this, he has to build political currency with the Europeans. Furthermore, Japan starts funneling troops into eastern Siberia in April. They make some landings around here, mostly in Vladivostok, actually. Now, US naval planners have been watching the empire for about 10 years and have already concluded that Japan will be America's greatest rival in the Pacific. And the Japanese Siberia looks almost as bad as a Bolshevik Russia. So Wilson agrees to send in the army. Wilson does this by executive order. It's not a secret. The administration does put out a press release, but it's not really talked about, and most of Congress has no idea. The army is going to land at 2 ports. Archangel up here on the Arctic Circle, and Vladivostok down here, right next to Korea and China, and right on the Sea of Japan, or the East Sea, depending. Now, since what I want to talk about is Vladivostok, we'll cover the Archangel campaign as quickly as possible. The landing was made by the 339th Infantry Regiment, about 5,000 men, mostly from Michigan. This is a National Guard unit out of Detroit. They're selected because the War Department thought that only northern Midwesterners could handle the cold. This campaign took place basically on the Arctic Circle with temperatures in excess of 50 degrees below zero. It's cold. The expedition was named the American Expeditionary Force North Russia, or AEFNR. The AEFNR was placed under British command as part of an Allied expedition of about 10,000 troops, arriving initially on September 4th, 1918. Now, upon arrival, the expedition discovered that 162,495 tons of supplies that they'd been tasked with protecting had already been captured and relocated by the Bolsheviks. In retaliation, the British commander took the expedition on campaign. His plan was to drive south towards Moscow along the railroad right here. I do hope you guys can see my cursor, but anyway, there's a railroad that leads from Archangel to Moscow. His plan was to I swear, it was nothing more than, let's see how far I get. Let's zoom in here. The answer is about 200 miles. Forgive my Google Maps screen cap here. They pushed down the Dvina River, that's here, and the railroad to Moscow, that's here. And that's when they ran into the Red Army. The Red Army was about 1 million strong, but they were spread out across Russia with sometimes no good communication between units. So the expedition faced a gradual buildup of forces as Leon Trotsky, the overall commander of the Red Army, sent more and more units north. Now these two wings here are actually additional units sent out from Archangel to try and refuse the flanks of the main expedition because the expedition was becoming surrounded. It's eventually too much. They beat a retreat back to Archangel. They castle up for the winter. We'll leave them there. Well, actually, not quite. Here's some pictures. Here's some pictures of the expedition. These are British troops. They're marching across the, well, actually skiing across the Kola Peninsula, actually north of Archangel. They're wearing much of the same equipment that eventually the Americans would be issued with. For example, the American expedition was issued with the same type of hats. Here's another picture. Here's an American sentry. He's in the port at Archangel. An American barracks. Notice the hats. When the Bolsheviks snatched up the supplies and ran out, they dumped a bunch of coal into the harbor, assumably stuff they couldn't carry. Here's some folks diving on it. This is during the winter, trying to recover the coal. I can't even imagine. Look at that. Okay, back to Vladivostok. The Wilson administration came up with what they considered a few good reasons to go in. First and foremost, guard those supplies. Next, there are about 70,000 ethnic Czechs and Slovaks strung out along the Trans-Siberian Railroad. And that's, okay, I got my cursor here. I don't know if you can see it. I think you can see it. It's the railroad. It's the railroad that goes through the center of the country here, Trans-Siberian Railroad. Okay, these Czechs and Slovaks had been in the Tsar's army, fighting under an agreement with the Allies that would get a Czech and Slovak state at the end of the war in recompense, right? So when Lenin ends the war with Germany, they try to travel to Vladivostok, here, go across the Pacific, across the United States, across the Atlantic, so they can get to the Western Front to continue fighting to uphold their end of the bargain. They're really in this. But after a violent altercation at a rail platform in the Urals, right here, Lenin declares war on this Czech and Slovak legion, and they have to fight their way out on a series of stolen armored trains headed for Vladivostok, and Wilson wished to assist in their extrication. Lastly, of course, to monitor Japan. What came to be known as the American Expeditionary Force Siberia, or AEFS, was composed of the 27th and 31st Infantry Regiments, chosen because they happened to be nearby in the Philippines. General William S. Graves, this poor man right here, was chosen to command the expedition. He was expecting to be given a command on the Western Front when Secretary of War Newton D. Baker gave him his real orders. The secretary was reported to have said, "If in the future you want to cuss somebody for sending you to Siberia, I'm the man. Watch your step. You will be walking on eggs loaded with dynamite. God bless you and goodbye." Now, Graves' orders put him in an unenviable position, completely at odds with the nature of his undertaking. So he was supposed to keep the peace, right? Protect Russian citizens, provide aid to the Czechs and Slovaks. And he was to protect American workers on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. So another story we don't have time to tell is how the Trans-Siberian had been run by an organization of Americans since 1917, a bunch of American railroad men. Graves was expected to carry all this out while simultaneously avoiding combat. Don't start a war with Japan. Don't fight the Red Army. Don't take a side in the Civil War. Eggs loaded with dynamite was right. The political and multi-ethnic reality in Vladivostok was complicated. The port was as much Chinese and Korean as it was Russian. Bolsheviks controlled the countryside north of the city. Marauding bands of Cossacks, Chinese bandits, white Russian separatists, and independent partisans made regular assaults on the railroad, the Czechs and Slovaks, and each other. Some were in the employ of Japan, others were not. No matter. General Graves' mission fell apart before he even arrived. Here's how it happened. We'll also do a brief overview of the campaign. Oh, and just to orient yourselves, let's go back a couple of slides here. Here's Lake Baikal. Here's Vladivostok. We're going to zoom in on this general area right here. Okay, 10,000 troops. The 10,000 troops of the AEFS began disembarking at the port of Vladivostok on August 14th, 1918. Graves didn't arrive until September 2nd. In the interim, this is nuts, in the interim, the AEFS was placed under Japanese command immediately. The commander saw his chance and threw the American expedition into combat with the Red Army north of the city. So, where's my cursor? Okay, this little arrow jetting off here, also into the north, into there. So when Graves got off the boat to assume command, he was already at war with the Bolsheviks. The AEFS then joined an international coalition of about 43,000 troops from Britain, Italy, France, China, Poland, Serbia, Romania, and Canada. Japan had agreed to contribute 12,000 troops to the Allied expedition, but arrived with over 73,000. Remember, in this era, Japan and Russia were close to mortal enemies, and after the Tsar's government collapsed, Siberia looked like easy pickings to the higher-ups in the empire. Allied planners correctly surmised that Japan was making a move to annex Siberia. In order to keep close tabs on the Japanese, listen up, the AEFS worked closely in several operations with the Japanese army. A combined American and Japanese force set out to secure the Trans-Siberian Railroad, advancing 1,800 miles into the interior and halting at the shores of Lake Baikal. Okay, so this route they follow here basically follows the northern end of the railroad. There's another one that goes, there's another section of the railroad that goes through Manchuria that they avoided. So they went up the northern route, 1,800 miles, set up shop at Lake Baikal up here. This wasn't just a footnote either. This was the main thrust of the campaign. The AEFS and the Japanese held this portion of the railroad for about a year, establishing small garrisons in the towns along the way. And there they fought off the Red Army, bandits, and Cossacks in more stolen armored trains. The Tsar's army had so many of these armored trains. According to the documents our man Robinson saved, some of his own comrades were stationed as far out as Chita. That's here. Okay, let's look at some photos I dug up in the National Archives. Now, these are all digitized and available online. Takes some real digging, but it can be done. All right, here's the first transport ship into Vladivostok. The Americans arrived. That's a Japanese honor guard rendering a salute on the left there. Here come the British. Okay, so that's Chinese right here. These are Americans. This is an international delegation of officers. I think these are Czechs, but I can't tell right here. Look at the British. They're wearing their KD uniforms and their foreign service helmets like they're marching on into Germany, East Africa or something. Actually, this is a good point. This is a good point to mention the temperature. The hottest temperature recorded by the expedition was 104 degrees. The coldest was 46 degrees below zero. Is an American train on the Trans-Siberian. The coats they're wearing are British issue, actually. I can't even imagine how cold. Look at that. Ah, this is a Czech armored train. Yeah, that's 10 machine guns. That's what we call it's what we call a force multiplier. That's a train made entirely of machine guns. Good Lord. All right, so this is an armored train operated by the Cossacks. Armored train is sort of a loose descriptor. There could be iron sheets like bolted to the inside of that. That's a machine gun nest, a mobile machine gun nest. And all these armored trains, they had names. This one is the Avenger. I don't know the name of this one. It's an American on the left there, and either a Cossack or a Czech in the center. Can't tell. Here we go. American on the right, Japanese soldier on the left. All right, back to Robinson here. In mid-September 1918, his unit, Company D, was detached from the 53rd Telegraph Battalion and assigned to the AEFS and ordered to Vladivostok as its only signal corps contingent. Sergeant Robinson kept a log of his work. He arrived in Vladivostok September 18th and immediately oversaw the unboxing and assembling of the company's vehicles. This took some weeks. Motor vehicles became very important because, unfortunately, none of the horses they brought with the expedition survived. They'd lived their whole lives in the Philippines and could not adapt to the cold. In all, Robinson was in charge of 17 Harley-Davidson motorcycles and several sidecars, 2 Ford one-ton trucks, and the Dodge touring car. These motor vehicles were also not suited to the climate. 4 motorcycles were rendered unserviceable, and 4 more were requisitioned by other units in the AEFS. Robinson was forced to cannibalize 2 more motorcycles for parts to keep the remaining 7 running. Both Ford trucks eventually broke down and were rendered unserviceable, and the Motor Transport Corps requisitioned the Dodge car. In turn, Robinson commandeered 2 trucks from the locals and kept them running for the duration of the expedition. Robinson's captain promoted him to sergeant first class just a few days before he was ordered back to the Philippines on or around September 12, 1919. Now, here's something of an amateur photographer who captured the following images. I like this one. I don't know if this is one of the trucks that they commandeered or if it's American, but it's at least American licensed. You can just make out the 2 doughboys with their Montana peaked hats driving it. I don't know who's in the back. I think it's probably Czechs and Slovaks, judging by the uniforms. Can't quite tell. A couple of guys screwing around with a broom. So this is either a British soldier or an American soldier in a British tunic, which sometimes happened when uniforms wore out. They were forced to share. He's probably British, but those collar devices really look like they're US Army. Not really sure though. No telling. It's a telephone repair shop, a field telephone repair shop. Now, D Company, a mere 88 men, was responsible for communications for the entire 10,000-man expedition. They had their work cut out for them. They established telephone communications September 19th and ultimately installed a network of telegraph line over 1,500 miles into the Russian interior. The photographic unit took over 1,200 still images and shot over 12,000 feet of film. And speaking of film, look at this guy. There were only 4 men in Company D qualified to operate the motion picture equipment. Therefore, that makes them the only 4 men in the whole expedition to do so. And I tried Googling this monument like crazy, but I couldn't find it. Obviously, it must have been torn down by the Bolsheviks after the Civil War. But in the process, I found this. So, in a moment here, I'm going to stop my share. I am going to start sharing a different window. Okay, I hope you all can see this. All right, get a load of this. This is D Company's footage from the expedition. The National Archives have the whole thing digitized. They have it on YouTube. You can watch it. Write down the title so you can look it up later. Allied Expeditionary Forces in Siberia, 1918 to 1919. Now, I have a timestamp that I want to go to, but first I'm going to click around to show you guys what you can see. You can see the whole darn thing. Here's a formation of Americans. Hold on. Here we go. Japanese sentries on a bridge. Red Cross train. Just all kinds of stuff here. Okay, I need to get to the timestamp that I wanted real quick. Oh, this is on the train heading out to Lake Baikal. Okay. There. Ready? Ready? Check it out, right? So there's the monument. All right. I am going to stop this share, back to my PowerPoint. So it tickles me to no end to know that this snapshot was taken by our guy Robinson right after that ceremony. In fact, the film that we just watched on YouTube is likely in the camera, like right there in that picture. In answer to the question, what is this monument? I was able to work backwards from that video and find the intertitle document for that piece of footage in the digitized National Archives. So now we know it's a monument to the Czech and Slovak soldiers who were killed 1 year ago fighting against the Bolsheviki. And here's this part here, unveiling the monument erected to the honor of the Czechoslovak heroes, this section we just saw. So how did the intervention come to an end? Well, morale collapsed in the AEF-NR during the winter of 1918-1919, and in the AEFS in the winter of 1919-1920. In total, 3 American companies mutinied and about 50 men deserted. I'll let John Cudahy of the 339th explain why in his own words. In the war with Russia, the soldier never knew why. He stood to his guns, witnessing his comrades killed and mutilated, the wounded lying in crude, dirty huts, makeshifts of dressing stations. He knew his physical strength was failing under the unrelieved monotony of the Arctic ration. He saw others with scabies and disgusting diseases of malnutrition and wondered how long before he too would be in the same way. He felt his sanity reeling. He asked his officers why he fought and why he was separated from his family and home and ways of life, and when the end would come. But his officers were silent under his inquisition. They asked the same questions themselves and got no reply. The colonel told his soldiers that he could give no reason for them to oppose the enemy other than that their lives and those of the whole expedition depended upon successful resistance. Following a letter-writing campaign to soldiers' families, Congress concluded the intervention. The AEF-NR abandoned Archangel in June of 1919, and the AEFS left Vladivostok in April of 1920. The entrapped Czechoslovak Legion managed to extricate themselves later that year. In 1922, the Japanese were finally compelled to evacuate Siberia when the Bolsheviks won the Civil War and founded the Soviet Union. In all, American forces suffered about 1,000 casualties of all types, including over 500 fatalities. They were buried in cemeteries across Russia, and the families themselves were left to negotiate with the Soviet government for the repatriation of the remains. And that is about all I have for you today. Now, besides Robinson, there were at least 3 other Iowans who served in his company. I've tried to follow up on all of these, but I haven't been able to find much information. So if you guys know any of these folks or know about any of these folks or who I can talk to, that's Leo Cherry of Ottumwa, Ralph Shaw of Victor, and Wilson Holland of Blockton. There's my email address down there. Please let me know. I'd be very interested to know. And that'll do it.
Are there any questions for Nick? You can type them in the chat, or if you want, you could go ahead and unmute and just ask them.
Hope, how do I find the chat from where I am right now?
Should be along the bottom.
Okay, I got it. I got it. There it is. There it is. How do I open the Q&A function specifically?
You know, I don't know if this has the Q&A. I think we only have the chat.
Oh, what happened to Robinson when he came back to Iowa? So sorry. He moved to Waterloo and he worked for Deers. He had a family, grandchildren, and he passed away in 1960. And he is buried. I have a note here on where he's buried. At the St. Ansgar Cemetery in Mitchell County. Did he see actual combat? I don't know. I don't think he did. Considering his MOS, he probably traveled on the railroad a little bit, but I don't know how far inland he got. All his documentation says that he was stationed in Vladivostok for basically the whole expedition. If we don't have any more questions, I just have a few, I have a few more images I'd like to show you if that's all right. How much time do we have left?
We have about 8 minutes.
Perfect.
Does look like maybe something else popped up here.
Oh yeah, okay, I'll have a look at that. Oh man, yeah, I know. Somebody, Virginia Ekstrom says, I just want to say, wow, learned an immense amount. Thank you. Yeah, so did I. I did not know we were in Siberia and participating in the Russian Revolution. Want to know more? Yeah, okay. There's a brand new book out by a guy, I think it's Adam Hochschild, but I'm not really sure. It's called the Polar Bear Expedition. That's about specifically the Archangel expedition. And John Cudahy's book is really, really good. It's called Archangel, the American War with Russia, published in 1924. It's his memoir. He was with the 339th. Yeah, he later became a senator. And his memoir is so good. It reads like a Philip Caputo book, like a Vietnam memoir. He's super mad. I think you can tell from the quote that I read you. Robinson's photos and all of his yes, George Kennan's book. Yes, very good, very good. Thank you, Dan Jones. Oh, there's another book that came out in the 50s called The Ignorant Armies. That's a good one too. I should have prepared something with references. Robinson's photos and all of his documents, and as it happens, his object collection are with the Grout Museum District in Waterloo, Iowa. We have it right here. Oh, and I am going to share my PowerPoint again. Wait, am I sharing my PowerPoint right now? Did I just minimize the window for myself? Oh, okay, cool. Redo. Okay, you can see this, right? This is an exhibit we put together for the centennial of the expedition a couple of years ago. And this is interesting here. So this is his shoulder sleeve insignia, or SSI, AEFS. He didn't, his uniform didn't come with it, so we had to recreate it. But we found some remnants of where it used to be sewed onto his shoulder, and we were able to determine, therefore, looking at the outline of it, that it was this diamond pattern. There were only two options of SSI that this particular expedition got. So it was either this diamond patch or this polar bear sitting back on its haunches with an S for Siberia in it. And that Gothic arch, I think, is supposed to represent an artillery shell. Check back with the chat, see if we have any more questions. How do I check the chat while I'm sharing my screen?
You should, it should still be available down there along the bottom, but maybe.
Okay, could you just read me if we have any questions anymore?
Yes, I will keep it. It doesn't look like it.
Okay, perfect. Nothing to look at here. Warning for everyone, there is a dead body in this picture. I'm gonna put it on screen. This is a Bolshevik, a member of the Red Army killed in combat. And here's an American soldier posing with it. This is a Signal Corps photo. And this photo really does demonstrate, and I don't know if I got it quite across in the presentation, how much better armed and equipped the Red Army was than the Americans. We tend to think, because we always think of World War II, so we think of the Red Army as being under-equipped, but the Red Army was actually doing very well in this period, comparatively. This is the Russian Civil War. It's no fun for anyone. But he's got his felt boots on there, heavy winter clothing. They're well suited to this. And remember, the Red Army had actually seen combat. These are mostly combat veterans, whereas none of the Americans who served in either expedition had seen any combat in Europe. There's no unit that served in both Europe and the Russian Civil War. Any questions yet?
No.
Great. So I mentioned that Robinson had to cannibalize 2 motorcycles to keep the remaining 7 motorcycles he had out of the original 17. He had to cannibalize 2 to keep them running. He was actually had to give, I don't exactly know how UCMJ works, but he was deposed for this. He had to, I think there was some sort of hearing or something, whatever this document it is. If you guys know what I call this particular document here, let me know in the chat. It looks like he had to attend some sort of hearing to explain himself. Not quite a courts martial, I think. And then this is great. So this is just your standard certificate that states that since he's been in the front lines for 12 months, he can wear 2 gold chevrons on his sleeve. And I mean, this is pretty normal, but it still gets me to see these documents that usually they say France down here, but every time it says Siberia this time. It's so interesting. Yeah, those are all the pictures I had to show you. Now, what has W. Jamie Ward posted in the chat here? Let's see.
I apologize. That actually is to a free storytelling workshop. And I finally found the link. I was in the dance session, and I was just trying to post it someplace anyway. I apologize.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Any other questions for Nick? All right, well, we will give you about 10 minutes to get to your final session of the day, but thank you so much to Nick for your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for attending.